It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
Take Command podcast from Odyssey Sports. What's up? What's happening? I'm Craig Hoffman. He is Logan Paulsen. And today we continue to look at some of the off-season rankings from some of the national pundits. Logan, we have yet to find one that really likes the Commanders. Did have a good conversation about Sam Howell with Dan Orlovsky the other day. That was fun. But we got some interesting commentary on that. But Logan, we start with the big story today when most of you are hearing this. I guess kind of today when we're recording it, Wednesday, but also into tomorrow, and that is the NFL schedule release. Should note that Logan and Linnell will be hanging out at Old Ox Brewery out in Ashburn. You can go and hang out with them for a live broadcast for the schedule release on Thursday night. That follows me on the air on the Team 980, also simulcast on 106.7 The Fan. But Logan, I think last year when you look at the Commanders' schedule, we knew instantly, for instance, that the Jacksonville game being early was going to be a good thing. Right. Like you'd rather see a team with a new coach early, and you knew that Trevor Lawrence and Doug Peterson would probably eventually find their stride. Sure enough, they did. They make the playoffs. They're competitive against the Chiefs in that playoff game. But this year, I think it's interesting that I don't know if there's exactly that one that stands out quite as like a sore thumb. But here's what we got in terms of the opponents. At home, they'll have the Cowboys, Dolphins, Eagles, Cardinals, Niners, Bills, Bears, and Giants. And then away, Seahawks, Jets, Eagles, Patriots, Cowboys, Falcons, Rams, Denver, and then the Giants. So you go to MetLife twice, you get Jets and Giants. Anything in particular stick out for you of teams you want to see early, late because of injury, coaching changes, anything like that?
Yeah, I think the big one that I want to see early is the Jets. Probably, I think with Aaron Rodgers coming in, I think learning. He's not learning an entirely new offense, but I'm sure it's a different culture, different environment, and I just don't want him to kind of find his stride in a new city with like relatively new staff. So I think I want to get that one early. The one that I think is kind of interesting is the Bills, because I thought they were kind of on a little bit of a skid last year. And I think that, losing Brian Daboll as the OC, a guy that was really maximizing what Josh Allen did at a high level, I thought really hurt them. And I think I think that's something that, Josh Allen being Josh Allen might start off hot in 2023, but I do think as a guy that as a team that'll probably decline a little bit. So I kind of want to see them probably week 10, week 11. Josh Allen's a little bit banged up. The offense that they've kind of put out there, this Josh Allen centric thing. So yeah, I think probably Jets early, Bills late. And then, those are the two ones that stick out to me right away. You have any thoughts, Craig?
Yeah, so there's a couple that I think stick out potentially, and on one of them in particular, it's a little too early to tell. The Niners are a team that I don't know exactly when I want to see them.
Yeah,
because Brock Purdy is coming off Tommy John surgery. He had that UCL injury, and so is he going to be ready at the start of the season? Probably not. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Right? Because that's the other thing. There's a chance that Sam Darnold comes in and storms off with that job. He is so talented, but has not really shown it consistently in the NFL. That said, his best stretch of football was probably the end of last year with Carolina. He started to find some things towards the end of the year when he circled back in for Baker Mayfield. It wasn't a very long stretch, but he had a couple nice games, and Carolina got competitive for a while, mostly behind the run game, but Darnold at least could do some things, if I'm remembering correctly on that. So Darnold is a guy that goes to San Francisco. Now he's got Kyle. Like, from a talent standpoint, it's the most talented quarterback Kyle's had in a while. But is it the mental processing and stuff that we always talk about that, for instance, Purdy is fantastic at that maybe Darnold isn't, that makes him not successful even with Kyle Shanahan, despite all that physical talent, the mobility, the arm strength, all that kind of stuff. So I don't know what I want out of San Francisco, because part of me wants them early when Darnold is new in the system. Part of me is scared that, like, you haven't seen what Kyle's going to do with Darnold, and that lack of tape could come out and be, really dangerous. And maybe you'd rather see them with Purdy later in the season, if Purdy's even able to take that job back. But early feels safer just because you don't know yet, versus whether it's Purdy or Trey Lance or Sam Darnold, if one of them finds a groove, that feels dangerous later in the season.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big believer, and you want to face Kyle Shanahan teams a little bit earlier in the season. I think the more film Kyle gets on you, the worse it is for your defense. I also think it's coming out of the offseason, Kyle, he's like a beautiful mind, man. Like he just has a lot going on. There's a lot of offense in. They don't really know exactly like who and what they want to be offensively just yet. So you never really want to face a Kyle Shanahan team, but you always want to face him, I think, a little bit earlier, just because like he's so fastidious with his process in terms of game planning. Like you could tell in the matchup last year against Washington, they knew exactly what this team was going to be doing. And I think because it was late in the year, they had a really good feel for who they are and what they wanted to be. That's offensively and defensively. So, yeah, I think that's a team you want to get earlier in the schedule. And again, not just because of the quarterback flux. I do think Kyle tends to overanalyze early, and then he kind of settles in. I think, the last couple of years they've started a little bit slow and then found this kind of dominant middle of the season, kind of crescendoing to the end of the year. They're still figuring out personnel. They use that time period in a different way. I know I talked to their strength coach quite a bit. Their off season's a little bit different, a little bit more subdued. Also, I think that lends itself to a slower start because you don't have everything quite figured out from a personnel standpoint. And that's fine. They're the best team in the division. They can do that. They're going to win some games late, and they're going to make the playoffs. So, but yeah, I think that's a team you want to get kind of when they're in a little bit of a little bit of a flux. Let's just say.
Yeah, definitely. The other team that I think is interesting from both an injury and a coaching standpoint, because this is the only team, if I'm looking at this correctly, the only team they'll face with a new, I guess Denver also, with a new head coach. Denver's obviously got Sean Payton, so that's an interesting one to see how he comes together with Russell Wilson. That one feels a little Jacksonville-y. Like maybe you want them early,
What was
get
it?
that out of
You
the
cut
way
out. What was
before
the name
they've
of
had a
it?
chance.
Which team?
Denver.
Okay.
So Sean Payton
Yeah.
and Russell Wilson before they can catch a groove and figure each other out. But the other one is obviously Arizona.
Yeah.
Arizona's a team that is going to be without Kyler Murray most of the season, probably with that ACL, and they've got a new head coach, new OC, new everything there. So Arizona, I would say, is less interesting just because I don't think they're going to be good at all next year, no
Yeah.
matter what.
I agree.
I just think they're going to be bad. So in some ways, it's like, can we have them week 13 and have a soft point in the schedule before you hit that division run down the stretch? But Denver feels like the most Jacksonville team to me on their schedule, where if you can get them early, there is a chance that Russell Wilson regains some form under Sean Payton and that they find a groove as the season goes.
No, I think that's right. I think that's kind of, Tana on the show the other day, he does like a Tana's Take segment. And he kind of, I think, very acutely was like, like that's my dark horse team this year is the Fighting Sean Paytons, and I think there's a lot of good reason to think that they've got a very dynamic receiving group. Obviously, Russell Wilson was one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL for a while. And like, can Sean Payton bring that out of him? I look at what he did with Jameis Winston the year that he was coaching there, and like Jameis was good.
This is the best year of his career.
Top 20 player, and like he did a really good job mitigating risk, finding stuff that he could do, taking advantage of his aggressiveness, like when it was time to take advantage of it. So I definitely think, like, we talk a lot on this show about the influence of coaches on players. And I think that's a perfect example of how a new coach could dramatically impact Russell Wilson. And like, if he's impacting the most important person on your team, that's a huge deal. So yeah, I agree. I think that's definitely like a Jacksonville type fit. Get them early before they kind of figure out really who they want to be. Yeah, I think, I think that's the right idea. I think teams that are going to that you might want to see later are like the Seahawks. I think the Patriots. I think you're right. The Cardinals, I don't think are going to be very good, period. But I think you want to get them while Kyler Murray's out, which could be the whole year. The Dolphins strike me as a team you also want to get early, in the sense
I want to get them in the rain. Whenever it's going to rain, give me the Dolphins in the rain.
Yeah. And where's that game? Is that in Miami or is that here?
That's home?
Yeah. So I think that, obviously they have a huge advantage earlier in the year because of temperature, but if that's here, it doesn't really matter as much. I do think, yeah, like I think you want to catch them a little earlier because they're in the Kyle Shanahan mold. The more film they get on you, the more prep they can have for you. Usually doesn't turn out well for you. So get them early when it's still kind of fresh or still kind of figuring it out. But yeah, in terms of teams later, like I think the Bills are candidates for that. Cardinals anytime. Patriots are interesting. What do you think about the Patriots? That's one that I think is kind of because of Bill O'Brien's addition, I think they're going to be significantly
Mm.
better. I just don't know how much better, you know?
They are such an enigma.
Yeah.
I don't know when I want that. That's one of those teams I can't make up my mind. Like, do you want it early before Mac and Bill O'Brien figure it out, or do you think that they might click early and then
Yeah, fizzle away.
Bill's a little combustible
Yeah,
and Mac's not exactly perfect?
yeah.
So are they going to have a blow up mid season and then that you can take advantage of? Do you want it also on the other side of the ball? Like, how much film do you want Belichick to have on
Yeah,
you?
it's a tough team.
I could see we're wanting them early because that way Belichick can't plan for what EB's doing with this team. There's a lot of unknown there.
Mhm.
So that's a funky one for sure. Seattle, like they're to me seem kind of like they've got a good identity. They know who they are. They're gonna want to run it, but they've got big playability, and they're gonna be that the entire year. So as long as their guys are healthy, it kind of doesn't matter when you play
I
them.
kind of feel like Geno Smith regression though a little bit, you know. And if Geno Smith, like
Maybe.
I like Geno Smith, I think, but I don't think he was playing like what was it like top 7
I
level
mean, he was
quarter.
awesome to start last
Yeah, and
year.
then he kinda started to fizzle a little bit, you know, and I think he was still playing fine, he's probably top 15, but I much prefer to play top 15 Geno Smith as opposed to top 7 Geno Smith, especially with the receiving groups, Jackson Smith and Jigma, the ad there in the slot receiver role there.
Yeah.
So I prefer to see them later, I think, because I do think he'll cool. He's getting older, Geno Smith, so he'll cool as the season goes on. I think, you know, this is all like total guess, but I think that's a team that again, like, I think they're going to come out like gangbusters because they always do, and I think they're going to kind of chill as the year goes on. So I want to catch them the second half. I think.
The Rams are an interesting one too. I mean, selfishly, if you're a player, you probably want that later in the year. You get a nice little warm weather getaway
Yeah,
in
right.
December.
Yeah,
Um, but and not to mention it can be 100 degrees in LA in September, so that's not super fun. But like Stafford back, do you just be like, oh, maybe he'll get hurt again?
yeah.
Like kind of that mindset.
And it's not even like
If you're
like
looking
a
at it from a fan,
bad injury. It's just like he's got
yeah,
tendonitis in his elbow and his shoulder. So
yeah.
like that, those are chronic use type things. And the more you play, the more you throw the football, like you're going to be less effective. And like, you know, it sounds like he's doing better. But again, maybe later in the year, and then you get some backup quarterback, and you know you get to roll the Rams. I don't know.
Yeah, that could be certainly possible. Chicago's an interesting one. Obviously, Fields got better and better as the season went. There's
That
there's
is
talk out of
interesting.
Bears camp, as you would imagine there would be this time of year, that he, where he is now compared to where he was last year. Like, it's not even like the same player. He's made such a leap. So, do you want him early, late? I almost lean towards later because his style of play, he has gotten a little
Interesting.
banged up.
Interesting. Yeah.
I would lean a little bit towards later on that one, but who knows? Falcons, like, do you really want to face that run game late in the year when you're banged up? I'd probably rather have them early.
Yeah.
When you're still hitting in
I
practice
I,
and
th-
things like
I
that.
think for them it's more like with the Falcons, it's like the game before and the game immediately after is the game is
Yeah,
that
you kind
that's
of want them before your bye week.
yeah, right. A game like where it's like you can kind of because you know you're going to come out a little like I mean, I just look at their offensive line at the moment, like holy cow, man! Like
So
they've
physical.
got so much draft capital invested in that group. They're really good. They got a three-headed monster in the backfield. Like it's a scary team to play. Like you know from a defensive standpoint, and I think like you said, you want them kind of going into a break or going into you definitely don't want to go on a trip right afterwards. You don't want to be going to like LA after you play the
Right.
Falcons, which is probably what the schedule makers would probably do that. But I think that's the team that I think is really interesting because they of the physical play style of their philosophy. I like your analysis on the Chicago Bears. With Fields like later in the year. I think that's 100% right. So yeah, I mean, I think the Falcons are sneaky in that way, man. That's a sneaky team because I think they're going to be sneaky good. And I think they're going to just beat the poop out of whoever they're playing. You know what I mean? So, like, you don't need
Yeah,
that.
whether they win or not,
Yeah.
like, there's going to be a toll to play. Like, there was that stat last year with the 49ers. Like, nobody won the week after they played the
Yeah.
49ers. Like, literally no one
Yeah.
won the week after they played the 49ers all regular season last year. The Falcons feel like a team that could have that same kind of effect. Last thing I'll ask you real quick. Any guesses on primetime games because I got a couple
I
theories.
mean,
We now know, as of recording, they've already released the international games. We know the Patriots are not hosting the Commanders in Germany, so no international trip this year. But the primetime games will probably be announced by the time this podcast comes out,
sure.
so people will get to know if we're right or wrong. Any thoughts on what you might see?
I mean, obviously the divisional games are going to be one of them is going
Yeah,
to be prime time. I think New York. I think last year those were some good primetime games late in the year. Obviously some of those were flex, but I think that's always a good matchup. Even though it'll be interesting to see where New York's at this year too. I really think like that was a little bit of an anomaly last year, not because of poor play by Daniel Jones. I just think the roster isn't good enough quite yet, And I think we've raved about the coaches and they've added some nice pieces, but I don't think they're going to be as good. I think Dallas obviously is another one that I could see being a primetime game. How many primetime games do they have this year? Do you know?
there is less of a limit than there used to
Oh,
be.
okay.
My guess is they'll have somewhere between 2 and 3.
Yeah.
That's my guess.
So
Like maybe there's 2 on the schedule, like a Thursday night, and then one of the more
yeah.
regular prime times, and then maybe one gets flexed if they're competitive late in the season.
Yeah, I mean, because like right now, like just looking at the national narrative about the team, like there's not a lot of hype. So it's like,
Yeah.
I'd be excited to, see a Seahawks primetime game or, Jets or Bills or whatever. But I don't think the league sees that as a very competitive matchup at the moment, And like if you look at the Vegas odds for this team, they're a 6.5 win team. They think they're going to get worse compared to last year. So, like I just think it's going to be division games, and I can't see them really going outside of that for primetime work for the Commanders.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Even though there are some interesting ones, like they're going to try to get the Jets in prime time a lot
Yeah,
this year,
mhm,
but is this a team that they do it against? I had Joe Ferreira on my show yesterday, who used to help make the schedule, and he said that he thinks they'll be at Dallas on Thanksgiving,
yeah,
which isn't technically prime time, but like is right. It's a four.
yeah,
The Dallas always plays the 3:25 game, the second game. Um, and like they'll probably want a division game for that. The Giants played last year. Cowboys Eagles, you don't need to make prime time.
right,
That game's going to draw massive ratings no matter what. That'll be like an America's game of the week on a regular Sunday at
sure,
4:25.
yeah,
And so that kind of leaves the Commanders left, and the Commanders haven't played on Thanksgiving in a while,
yeah,
since 2020. So I think that's a distinct possibility. I ran my original theory, Logan, was that they were going to open the season at home, in prime time, whether it's Sunday or Monday Night Football, because for the first time in years, the stadium is going to be full. Like
mm,
with the ownership situation, I thought they're going to host the Cowboys to open the season on Sunday or Monday Night Football, and that ran like, hey, not Josh Harris's Commanders. That could be a massive storyline where people are going to tune in and pay attention. Joe kind of shot that down. He said, I don't think that'll be a
yeah.
factor. Unlikely. I'm still not ready to completely let that go, because I do think like a packed FedEx Field is something that the league would like to showcase.
Yeah, but I also think,
But
like
I think that there's probably better options.
opening night, like you want, again, I think that this team's going to be pretty competitive. But when you look nationally, that's just not that's not in the card. Like right now, obviously we're in May, but people are not very high in this team. We're going to talk about
Oh yeah.
position rankings in a second, but I think that's going to just be any kind of big moment. They're going to defer to somebody else, because right now I think there's some. I saw some ranking that had them as the 27th team in the NFL. You know what I mean? Like there's
Yeah.
not a lot. I think we were talking about that maybe 2 weeks ago. Like
Yeah.
there's not a lot of positive vibes here. So I think any kind of big moment, they're going to say, is there anybody else? And it's like only when it's like, these iconic matchups within the division are they going to get primetime work, I think.
Well, right, which is why I said I would think that they would make it like Cowboys visiting here.
But think about like if it was like Cowboys Philly, let's start the season, or you know what I mean, like some
Sure.
big, you know
No,
what I mean,
totally.
like
I totally get that. I guess my thing is for the league to showcase the NFL is back in Washington. Like, hey, you've heard all this stuff. It's been really bad. The stadium's been empty. Everyone knows it's been a joke. Snyder's awful, but now he's gone. And to see like, hey, look, football's back in Washington. The fans are back. The stadium is jammed, and it's jammed with Commanders fans. Like,
yeah.
hey, this is like, I think that would be a smart thing for the league to do. I think it would rate well. I also understand that
Do
there's
they
probably better options. And I also would understand if the league doesn't really want to rub dirt in the wound. They just want to quietly move on to the next ownership group, because that's seemingly how they've handled this entire thing.
I mean, do you think they
Again,
really?
I think that's a mistake, but
Do you think?
that's my thought
Do you
process.
think they care about this market like that though? Like, because I mean, if anything, like I'd be like, if Washington's playing well, do that later in the year. But do you think they care about the
Sure.
market enough to do that right now? Do you think the
Yeah, I
league?
mean, I think that's one of the driving forces behind them being a little more pushy with Dan. They'll be like, "Nah, man, you got to like, even if it's behind the scenes, they're not actually going to vote him out." Where they've been like, "Yeah, man, you got to go." Like the loss of revenue in this market and the loss of ratings in this market is a discussion amongst league people, and getting it back is something that they really like. The whole sleeping giant thing, like
Mm,
they could just get an owner in there who knows what he's doing, and they could get a competitive team on the field, like they'll the money here would be outrageous compared to what it is now. They've been one of the only teams to lose money in local revenue, or they're so far behind. I don't know whether it's an actual loss. I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but they are dead last in local revenue. They're dead last in attendance. And I think, I do think there's an opportunity if things are going well during the season to showcase that
sure,
later,
I
obviously.
agree.
But I like, because of the way the ownership sale has gone. Like we've talked about this internally at the radio station. I'll peel back the curtain a little bit, right? Like obviously we would have loved to have a day of celebration where we know like this is when the team is going to transfer. This is when it's sold, like big celebration. We kind of did it when the news leaked a couple of weeks ago that there was an agreement in place. And obviously the fan was out at Old Ox where you're going to be tomorrow night for the schedule release, and people came out in droves. They did the buy Dan beer and like all that kind of stuff. And it was a big deal, but there was still like this couching of it, of it's a non-exclusive deal. There's still a lot, this Canadian dude still kind of bidding on the team. There wasn't this moment of like celebration and release in the fan base like most people thought there would be. There's been just a slow drip of news. And now even it's been reported by the Post that the deal might get approved in stages. I think because of that, the big moment of celebration, the moment when fans come together to celebrate a new era is going to be week one, assuming that week one is at home. I think that game is going to be a sellout, and it's not going to be sold out with the other team's fans. It is going to be the most burgundy and gold that has been in FedEx Field, maybe since the playoff game in 2015. And so if that's the case, showcasing that to a national audience would make sense to me, but that is a giant, litany of factors when you could just put on Eagles, Chiefs, Eagles, Cowboys, whatever, and just be like, hey, here's two of the best teams in the sport. Here's
Have fun,
or
yeah.
get Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes playing, and like go from there. So I get it, but I do think it's an opportunity for them at some point to be featured in a major way, in a primetime window because of that reason.
Yeah, and I think that's something that would probably happen later, I would think. Just knowing the
Yeah.
league and like kind of how they do early matchups, it's like these are the best teams last year. Look at them play. It's really exciting. And even if those teams aren't very good, like last year the Bucks were not very good, but they had a whole bunch of primetime games early because
Right.
Tom Brady, because they draw eyes. I think
Mm-hmm.
if this team does even, mediocre, even if they're, like 8-6 going to the last half of the season, like they're going to get some more love in that department. I think because of the reason you're talking about, and I think they deserve it. They would deserve it if that was the record, but I think they're going to wait. They're going to slow play it because again, I just the more national media you consume, and this is everywhere. This is PFF. This is Vegas. This is whatever it is. They're the expectation for this team is extremely low, and I don't think the league is going to bet on low expectations coming out the gate.
Yeah. They seemingly always play Philly on a Monday night. They seemingly
Yeah,
always play New York on a Thursday. So I would
I
mark
think
that
that's
down as
probably it.
potential
Yeah.
too. You get an Amazon game on a Thursday against the Giants, home or away. I could see them doing that with the Jets game, honestly, as well, potentially. And then maybe they get a Monday night game against the Eagles or Cowboys. We'll see. And by the time this comes out, chances are we'll probably know.
Yeah.
Take Command podcast from Odyssey Sports. Craig Hoffman here, Logan Paulson there. Speaking of the low national expectations, Logan, Mike Clay of ESPN has gotten a lot of run the past couple of days. They put out their preseason rankings, and Mike's kind of at the head of this, their positional groups, all that kind of stuff. And there are two in particular that have caught our eye. We got quarterbacks and wide receivers, where the Commanders are very low compared to what you might think, even if you don't think very highly of them. Do you want to start with wide receivers or quarterbacks?
I think they're really intertwined. So it just depends. Like quarterbacks, maybe I don't know. Quarterbacks because
Okay,
it's
let's
most
start with quarterbacks. So Mike's got him dead last.
32,
He
baby.
says the quarterback group in Washington is 32nd out of 32 teams. Just for kicks and giggles, the quarterback group looks like, where'd it go? I had it
I
pulled
got
up,
it. You
and
want me
now
to
I
get it
don't.
for you?
All right, here we go. Quarterback group looks like this. Kansas City won, and of course he lists out, but we're really talking about starters here.
I
Although I think with
mean,
Washington, maybe we're not. So we'll
so
get
I
there.
will say this too, though. Like it's as you would expect. The top 5 teams are teams that
Sure.
totally. I'll give them 6. Top 6 teams are teams that are 100% make 1000% sense. And I think if you kind of again, like if you're doing a draft ranking and you're tiering this out, Kansas City, Buffalo Bills, Cincinnati Bengals, Philadelphia Eagles, Los Angeles Chargers, and the Baltimore Ravens. Young, athletic, super talented quarterbacks. I mean, there's nothing more kind of obvious than that to me. Like that, I mean,
Yep.
I don't think you can debate that, really. I mean, maybe you can, Craig, but to me, I'm buying that
Nope.
100%.
Those are the 6. Although I would probably include, I would switch 7 and 8. He's got
Well,
the
yeah,
Jets 7 with Aaron Rodgers. 8 is Trevor Lawrence in Jacksonville.
yeah.
I would switch those, and I would draw my tier line below Jacksonville.
I see. So
I
you
I
go
think
7.
Trevor
You go 7
I
there.
think Trevor Lawrence is in that group
Yeah, I'd like
this
to see
year.
him one more year, but I definitely think he's close. And so that's why to me, I'm okay with him being out of that kind of first tier quarterback, just in my perspective. And I agree. I think it's, if I was going to give one, there's multiple knocks on the list, but that's something I could easily see like, and
Yeah. Well,
that's why you tier it. Cause
if I'm going to be really harsh, honestly, if I'm going to be harsher with that first tier, then I'm taking, like, I would probably put Lamar up. Maybe you take him down because of the injuries, but like really the tier line's at 4.
for
It's
you.
Mahomes, Allen, Burrow, Hurts. Like, I think Herbert and Lawrence have to be grouped together more than Herbert does with Mahomes.
I see what
You
you're
see
saying.
what I'm saying?
But I say if you're gonna subdivide that first group, I think
Mm-hmm.
it's the first 3. So I think it's Kansas City, Buffalo Bills, Cincinnati, kind of is definitively the number one, and then I think it's the next 3 guys. I think it's Philly, Chargers, Ravens are kind of in a similar tier for me. If I'm gonna subdivide that first tier,
Yeah.
and so like,
I'd put Lawrence with that group, but I
mhm.
understand wanting to see him more. I just like, I think Lawrence and Herbert kind of belong together.
And I guess so. That's a good point because I guess if you look at your next tier, which is the New York Jets, Jacksonville
Rodgers,
Jaguars.
Watson, Prescott, Tua, Kirk
Yeah.
probably is where the line gets drawn.
Yeah, I'll buy that. I actually am surprised Kirk is so low on this list, honestly. Just for how productive he's been the last 2 years, totally
Yeah,
honest. And I'm surprised Deshaun Watson is so high. And I understand like,
that would be my biggest gripe in that one. Is Watson was pretty awful last year.
yeah, and I understand Watson was the 3rd best quarterback in 2020. Is that right? 2000
Yes.
he had the 3rd highest PFF ranking like for that year. Awesome year. Nothing around him, balled his face off. Recent history last year and then him not playing the year before would suggest that he does not deserve that. And I would probably, based on last year, which I know you can't do everything based on that, would move Kirk above like Dak Prescott and Tua Tagovailoa. You know what I mean? Like that's
Mhm.
just me. Would you disagree with that, Craig?
No, I wouldn't. I think if Tua's healthy, he's above Kirk.
Yeah,
But
but for
he
me, the
hasn't
health thing
stayed
is yeah,
healthy in a long time. So that's hard to project. Like, who would I rather have in Madden if the injuries are off? Tua. But Kirk has been so reliable over the course of his career, and he's now got year 2 in the system with Kevin. Obviously they worked together
yeah,
previously here, but year 2 in that system, like, I'd probably bump Kirk up. Like, I trust Kirk. He and Dak like are 2 peas in a pod to
yeah,
me for
very
sure.
similar. Yeah,
Tua is hard because of injury. Watson's hard because of projection versus reality.
and like
Like, what he was last
history. Yeah,
year was really bad. Obviously he was really good before that. But like, he's a fundamentally changed person, I
yeah,
would think. Like, after the thing that I'm not gonna say what he went through, the thing that he put himself through,
right.
by his behavior, and coming out of that on the other side, like, I would not surprise me if Deshaun Watson is just not the guy that he was before
Right.
all of that.
Yeah.
So
It's so
yeah,
I also think it's so funny looking at this list. So after Trevor Lawrence, who's at 8 in this list with the Jacksonville Jaguars, after him, it's like it gets like super muddy to me. Like
mhm.
I was like looking for the next delineation and it's like Kyler Murray, you know? It's like basically 8 or 9 to 22 are like very similar players to me. You know what I
You
mean?
could see any of them making a jump up to the top 10.
Yes. Yes. Like that it's really weird. It's like you got like Dak Prescott, Tua Tagovailoa, Kirk Cousins, Daniel Jones, who I think is elevated by coaching, is a little high for me after 1 year, but I understand why he's
Agreed.
here. Russell Wilson, Matthew Stafford, injury concern, whatever. Justin Fields, this is probably a little high based on him just playing quarterback, but obviously his rushing ability is tremendous.
I mean, he rushes from the quarterback position, so I'm not gonna detriment that. It's
Correct,
it's a
right.
quarterback ranking, not a passing ranking.
Correct, yes. And then Derek Carr, Jared Goff, probably based on last year, a little low, I think.
Way too low.
Yeah.
He's probably my biggest non-Washington gripe on the list.
Yeah.
I would probably have Goff 13 behind Cousins on
I
this
love
list.
that actually. I would do the same thing, I think. Yeah. I think we see that exactly the same. Geno Smith, probably also a little low based on last year, but 1 year of performance, you know,
Yeah.
I'm probably moving him up ahead of like Justin Fields, for example. And probably even I'd put Justin Fields below like Derek Carr, but again, the rushing ability, Jimmy Garoppolo, that's why you got to tier these guys. They're basically the same player, Ryan Tannehill and then Kyler Murray. And so I think
Yep.
like if you feel differently, if you're listening to this podcast and you feel like, oh, one of those guys has got to be moved up, like I think you're out of your mind.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree that any of those guys can go anywhere up to the Kirk Cousins line. And
Right.
I would say I can see why you think that.
Yeah.
Outside of like until you get to maybe Tannehill probably belongs in the bottom of that, but he probably belongs in this group as
Yeah.
opposed to the next one. He's like the one guy, and then because of the injury, Kyler's like not going to play most of the
Yeah.
year.
Mhm.
So I would have a hard time bumping him up just on pure availability. But obviously, if you're going, hey, well, if he comes back and he's Kyler Murray, then he shoots up near the top of this.
Yeah.
So I agree with you there. I would quibble about where he's got like Carr versus Geno versus Goff, but like they're all in the right tier.
Yeah, they're in that like second. I mean, depending on how you tier that first tier, if it's two groups or one group, it's the second tier. Like they're second tier quarterbacks, those guys that are going to kind of fall
Yep.
between, being, a top 8 player and just above 25. You know what I mean? Like they're all kind of in that soupy mix of guys you probably want to upgrade over and guys that are good enough to win you some football games. So,
Yeah. I think the other thing that's interesting about that group is most of them are probably at their peak or on the way down, with
yeah,
the exception of Fields and Goff. Like
that's a great
those
point.
two, I
That's a
mean,
great point.
Gino's a weird one because he hasn't played a lot,
And
but
Daniel
he's
Jones,
30
maybe?
something.
Daniel Jones, maybe?
Yeah, Daniel Jones, I guess, is
But
probably
I
yeah, he's young enough that I could see him with more coaching from Dable getting better. But most of these guys are like this is where they are and it's where they're gonna live for their entire careers. Like they're at Kirk's level,
yeah,
right? Like Kirk has now ascended, I guess, out of this group barely to being the last guy in the group above. And like that's his ceiling. And like when Kirk was here, we'd have all these discussions about Cousins in 2015,
Mhm.
right? It's like, who can he be? Can he be a top 10 quarterback? And it's like, maybe for a given year, but like
Yeah,
he's never going to get higher than 10 or 9,
yeah,
depending on what's going on in the league.
yeah,
That's kind of who he is. I think Fields has the chance to ascend to an MVP like level if everything goes right, like
right,
based off the talent. I think Goff can ascend into the top 10 and certainly did for the back end of last year. But mostly these guys are just kind of going to be this muddy middle for
yeah.
the rest of their careers at this point. And some of the young guys that are below them are going to join them and then jump them. Or these guys are going to fall out into that group as low end starters and then ultimately high end backups to end their careers.
So where's your tiers? Because mine is, I agree. Like mine is probably 1 to 8, and then 9 to wherever we just were, 22.
12.
Yeah, or you're going 12. So you have a
So
second
I would
tier,
I would cut off Kirk from
the muddy middle.
like I would say I, I don't know what to do with Watson.
It's
But
that's what I'm saying. It's like
Lawrence
it's
Lawrence I would say I would draw my line at Lawrence 1 through 8.
Yeah.
Watson, Prescott, Tagovailoa, Cousins are kind of in like this 1.5 group.
Okay.
And then Jones through, and honestly, I would consider putting Goff in that group based off
Me too.
last year.
Me too.
So let's say 9 through 13. And we'll just stick Watson there for now. Although last year Watson belongs in the bottom tier, like literally, he was that bad.
Yeah.
But so that leaves us 14 with Goff bumping up. So Daniel Jones through Kyler Murray at 22 is the next tier.
Yeah.
So then you've got Kenny Pickett. This is again back to Mike Clay's rankings. Steelers with Pickett, Trubisky.
20.
Niners. That's
23. Yeah, 23.
Pickett, Trubisky. Niners with Purdy, Lance, and Darnold. Panthers, Young, Dalton, Corral. Texans, Stroud, Mills, Keenum. Colts, Richardson, Minshew, and Ellinger. Patriots, Jones, Zappy, McSorley. Packers, Love, Clifford, Etling. Falcons, Desmond Ridder, Taylor Heineke, Logan Woodside. Bucks, Baker, and then Kyle Trask. And then he's got the Commanders dead last with Howell, Brissett, and Fromm.
Yeah.
That, to me, is a joke.
So, I mean, what I would ask you is if we're tiering it, they're in the correct tier, right?
Yes, but it's kind of like the Tannehill. Like Tannehill belongs in that middle muddy tier, but he belongs at the bottom of it.
Yeah.
To me, when you have Brissett, like, is Brissett the best quarterback I just named? I mean, especially if, like Purdy was the guy last year who was probably the best, but he's coming off Tommy John, and we don't know when he's going to be available. Is there anybody in the quarterbacks I just named that is better than Jacoby Brissett?
I think
Baker, maybe.
I was going to say the only guy I would say outside of Brock Purdy based on last year, and again, like, Bryce Young and CJ Stroud are interesting because I do think they definitely have the potential to be higher, would be Kenny Pickett, maybe. And again, like
Maybe.
he played well, but was not overly productive, which is why that is hard for me to say. Like he was effective, he made plays, but didn't score a lot of touchdowns. And is that his fault entirely? I don't know. But that's kind of
he did have a lot of interceptions that were just crazy unlucky.
Yeah, and so that to me is the only guy. Mac Jones from 2 years ago, but obviously Mac Jones from last year, no. So
right.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying. Like in terms of backup. But I think they're in the right tier. I don't think you can argue that, really. I think
agreed.
Like 23.
But the idea that they're going to have the worst quarterback play in the NFL to me is just like, you're telling me they're worse than Ridder and in Atlanta?
That's an interesting
Like, what
one.
are we doing?
Like because again, like I kind of see this situation very similar to Atlanta, right? You've got a young quarterback. Obviously Ridder was a 3rd-round pick. Howell was a 5th-round pick, whatever. But to me, it's very, very similar. Like a good backup, and I think Jacoby's better than Taylor. And I think
Agreed.
Sam has probably a better arm than Ridder, but I do think this is something that, again, we're going to get into when we talk about receivers too. I do think that the system in Atlanta is going to really insulate Desmond Ridder, like really insulate him. So like, and here, I think Sam's going to be put out there a little bit. I think they're going to try and insulate him, but I think like in terms of if I had a kid and I wanted him to play quarterback in the NFL, like I want him going to Atlanta because like they're going to run the heck out of the football, play action, 3-level throws, easy reads, just get the ball where it's got to go, And I think like maybe that's why he's a little bit higher. What do you think about that?
Maybe. I mean, I was talking to Orlovsky the other day about this because he brought up, like, he had to pick a second-year quarterback who he thinks could lead his team to the playoffs for get up, and he chose Sam.
Oh,
and so
really?
I texted him. Yeah, I texted him. I was like, hey, can you come on and talk about this more? And I would suggest anyone listening to this would love that interview. So go to my YouTube page and check it out. But Dan said the system that EB runs is so similar to what Sam ran in college,
right?
That there is going to be some insulation there.
Yeah.
There's the insulation that they are going to want to run the football, and 2, there's the insulation of familiarity. It's an RPO based system,
right?
But it's not like a one read RPO. What Dan was explaining is and certainly this, there's like 3 or 4 plays in one.
Yeah.
So the idea and that's what Sam had at UNC, right? So the ability to get in the right play is there all the time. it's just a matter of the quarterback making the right decision, which is a lot on Sam's plate. But if it's something that he's shown capable of and can do at the NFL level, he could have a really good year
Yeah.
because there are weapons around him, and that stuff does help the offensive line. And there's just a smarter, better infrastructure. And I don't know, like putting them over Tampa putting them behind Tampa is crazy to me. Putting them behind Atlanta is crazy to me. I don't know how it's pure projection on Jordan Love in Green Bay. New England was a disaster last year. Like
but I think
Indianapolis,
that's the thing. I think that's the thing. So it seems pure projection on Jordan Love, but he had 2 starts last year, and he had
look good.
and he looked good. And again, like it's super small sample size. Sam's an even smaller sample size, right? So it's like, how do you say that this guy that's been backing up for 2 years, one of the best quarterbacks of all time, in an offense that does a good job of insulating quarterbacks? Like it's the same offense that Kyle runs, or a version of that offense. It's like they're cousins or whatever. And then again, Atlanta, I go back to just like that system. He's not going to have to do a lot, and they've got big, dynamic guys who are great at the catch point. Kyle Pitts and Drake London, who again are young, developing players, but very, very talented in that kind of off-target throw catching department, which Ritter struggles with.
Sure.
So I don't know. I'm not saying they deserve to be 32nd, because I personally hate Tampa Bay quarterback situation more than anything. But they're definitely
Agreed.
they're in that kind of mix. And,
right.
and
I think there's also, Logan, just like inconsistency. Like, where are we projecting and where are we saying where they are right now?
Yes.
Right. Because like CJ Stroud, do we actually think he's going to be good this year?
I mean, kind of. I don't know.
Really?
I mean, he doesn't have a whole.
But
We gotta look at
they
his
don't have a whole
receivers.
lot around him.
That's what I was about to say. Like the O-line there is pretty good. Receivers, playmakers, weapons there, not great, And so like again, Bobby Slowick is the offensive coordinator there. Kyle Shanahan offense, like maybe they help him out. To me, Anthony Richardson, is he going to be balling like that year one? I think Bryce Young is probably the safest pick here, in terms of rookie quarterbacks. But again, it's almost like, look at this. Just take a look at it. You could go almost by draft order outside of Brock Purdy and say, Kenny Pickett, first round pick, Bryce Young, first round pick, CJ Stroud, first round pick, Anthony Richardson, first round pick, Mac Jones, first round pick, Jordan Love, late first round pick, Desmond Ritter, third round pick, and then obviously Baker Mayfield, whatever, light him on fire because he's had a rough go. But Sam Howell, 5th round pick. So it's almost exactly draft order to get you to this. And I wonder if that's just what our guy here is doing.
Maybe.
But you bring up a great point with Jacoby Brissett. Like, I think that's a fantastic point. Like, on this list right now, having played in the NFL, he's the best quarterback in the bottom half of this. Right? He's the best quarterback.
If there's an NFL game, emergency schedule, surprise, there's a game tomorrow. You got to pick one good dude to play off this list. It's Jacoby.
And I guess you could argue maybe Andy Dalton, but it's the same kind of like.
I'd take Jacoby over Dalton.
Right, but I'm saying it's like that same tier.
But Jacoby was a top 10 QBR guy last year.
I know,
like
he balled last year. So to me, that's a great point. If you're ranking quarterbacks like that, I think that's a fantastic point. And so I do think with Sam specifically, I understand the reluctance to move him up, but I also think he just took the draft order and just happened. That's personally what I think.
Take Command podcast from Odyssey Sports. That's Logan Paulson. I'm Craig Hoffman. All right, last thing that plays into this as well. Clay also released his wide receiver rankings, and we'll go quick on this, Logan. But he's got the Commanders at 11th. This seems low to me initially, but let's go through it. There's definitely some teams that I completely disagree with. But I do think the tiers thing is super interesting because I think the tiers are a lot wider here.
Sure.
Like I don't think the cutoff is as high as it is with the quarterback.
With the quarterbacks,
so he's got the Bengals one, which I think is probably correct. Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd, and I'm just going to go top 3, right? He's got the Seahawks 2 with DK, Lockett, Jackson Smith, and Jigba.
Doesn't it? You had a lot of reservation in your voice there, but like DK Metcalf, baller, Tyler Lockett, baller, Jackson Smith and Jigba, the first receiver selected in this last year's draft. So obviously,
like they're good, but are they the second best group in the league?
I mean, who would you put ahead of them at this point? Is my question. Like of the guys listed.
I'd put Washington's right there with them. I'd put Miami certainly right there with them. I'd put Philly right there with them.
But that's what I'm saying. Like if you're looking at tiers, right? Like I would put them at the top, near the top of tier 2, and it's kind of flavor. You got a physical freak in DK Metcalf. You get one of the most consistent receivers in the NFL who doesn't get a lot of love in Tyler Lockett. And then
Sure.
Jackson Smith and Jigma, arguably the best receiver in this year's, not arguably, like he was definitively the best receiver in this year's class. So, and now they all have defined roles. So like I don't know if they're going to utilize these guys the way they need to be utilized, talking specifically about Jackson Smith and Jigma. But if you're just looking at talent, I think that's a pretty freaking talented group of guys. I think,
Totally. But like, would you take DK or Terry?
That's a good question. It's close. I mean, they're very similar. Probably take DK just because of the physical freakiness of it. But I think Terry's it's close. It's like really,
I
what's
think
your
it's close.
flavor?
I'd personally take Terry, but
Right.
I will not.
I wouldn't be
I would
mad at you
not
for that.
quibble. All right. Would you take Tyler Lockett or Jahan? Projecting into
I'd
year
probably
2,
take
considering what Jahan did last year.
Yeah, I'd probably take Tyler Lockett, and that's not a knock on Jahan. I just think Tyler Lockett's a heck of a football player, and he's been consistently good. How old? I don't even know how old he is, but probably nearing the end of his career. But I think that experience is really valuable to me. You know what I mean? And
He's
so,
30. I would
yeah,
probably agree with you, but it also wouldn't surprise me if that looks really silly by the end of this year because I think Jahan's
yeah.
special.
No, I
And
think
then
John's
would you
special too.
take Smith and Jigba or Curtis? And again, it becomes down to kind of like, well, Smith and Jigba is completely a projection. Curtis
Sure.
is the exact kind of guy that in Bieniemy's offense has been killer the last couple of years, and he has shown that he still has capabilities, but obviously hasn't had the production since he signed. So like that's kind of I guess my thing is like you go to
Sure.
Miami right at 3. Would you take Tyreek or DK? Obviously, you take Tyreek. You take Tyreek
Right.
against almost anyone. Would you take
Yeah.
Waddle or Lockett? I'd take Waddle at this point.
I'd say I might go Lockett. I think Lockett's better. I think as a 2,
Interesting.
Lockett is maybe. Let me just look at this list real quick. Maybe the best 2 outside of Chris Godwin, maybe Jacoby Myers, in this list. Maybe the best 2 on the list.
Yeah,
T.
he's
Higgins,
real good.
so he's in that kind of. And he's been super productive. He's been super consistent. Like you can sit your watch by him, and like
Yeah,
Jalen Waddle to me is a little bit of a one trick pony. Like he's fast and like I love
good trick.
fast guys. And I will say
Yeah.
like Tyreek Hill, Jaden Waddle, like that is a very unique group, but it also fits exactly what Miami wants to do. So is
Right.
Jalen Waddle as good in Seattle? Probably not. But is Tyler Lockett just as good in Miami's offense? Probably. It's like he's just a more
That's a good
well-rounded
point.
receiver.
That's a good way to
You know what
put
I'm
it.
saying?
Yeah.
So like I think I love Miami's receiver room. Love it. But again, like I just think Tyler Lockett just a better receiver,
Yeah.
like at this point in his career.
If you do this by top 2, then I think Philly probably jumps. You have AJ Brown and Devontae Smith, but they drop off significantly after that.
Yeah.
Dallas seems a little high. CeeDee Lamb and Brandon Cooks. I like
I wanted
CeeDee
to
a
ask you
lot,
about
but like
this because we did this on the show yesterday. I was talking to Tan about this, and you're really like CeeDee Lamb's, one of maybe the best receiver in the division outside of Terry and AJ Brown. Like they're kind of in that cluster of top guys for the
yeah.
division. Does Brandon Cooks, his speed, elevate CeeDee Lamb because of the space it creates? Would be my question to you. And
Yeah,
like,
maybe, but I
are,
just don't.
are
Hey, Brandon Cook's been hiding in Houston. Is he still good? I don't know.
he?
He
I mean, he's
might
a good
be.
player. He's a good
Yeah, he
player, but
might
again,
be.
he's a little bit of a one trick pony, though.
Right. Hopkins and Marquise Brown is an interesting one. Arizona, they've got 6. Chargers,
They were
they've got
super. I got to just get this off my chest. I checked all
yeah,
the PFF rankings for these guys before the show.
yeah,
They were by far the worst group. But I also want to point out their quarterback was hurt. So I also think there's a little bit of like how successful are they going to be given their quarterback situation kind of subconsciously woven into this a little bit, because I played with Hopkins. It was him and Julio Jones, right? Like in terms of
yeah,
guys that I played with that were ballers, but not very
right.
productive last year. And how much of that is driven by the quarterback? All right. Had to get that off my chest.
Yeah, no, totally. Arizona, then LA, Allen, Williams, and Johnston, the rookie, Josh Palmer, they go 4 deep. Buccaneers, Evans, Godwin, Russell Gage. Raiders, Devontae, Jacoby Myers. Vikings, Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, KJ Osborne. Commanders, Terry, Jahan, Curtis.
Yeah.
That's kind of honestly where I would draw the line, though. Like, that's the
What about
thing that's
Denver?
different.
Denver's pretty good.
Denver's pretty good. Jerry
San
Jeudy, Cortland
Francisco's good
Sutton.
too. I
San
mean, that's
Francisco's good.
I
Maybe,
would draw the line at
yeah.
New York. Yeah, I'd draw the line at New York would be
New
my line.
York. Yeah, I could see that. I could see that. I think where you lose Denver and San Francisco maybe is the depth. Like how is
Yeah,
Ayuk actually good, or is he San
right.
Francisco's best outside receiver? And Debo, like obviously Debo's great. Um,
But look at
Jerry
the
Jeudy
Broncos.
is not quite like the elite level one that a lot of these other guys are. That's where
But
I would potentially draw the line. Like he's an
Portland's
awesome
Sutton.
two or a low end, like a 1C
Yeah,
kind of.
right, right.
But
But
I could also see the argument of drawing that line of top tier at 13. Um,
But I
the
like look at
Jets,
let's talk about Denver for 1 second. Like Cortland
yeah,
Sutton, like legit 2. Tim Patrick also legit 2. Mims, second round pick, maybe the best receiver in terms of adjusting to the ball down the field. So that's
so they
4
get
like
depth. Yeah,
their depth is outstanding. Now I agree, your top end's probably not. It's not that top end guy, but their depth is awesome.
yeah. Or anybody else that you really like or want to point out? I mean, I think Buffalo feels low with Diggs, Davis. I mean, they don't really have a lot of depth this
I think
year.
it's depth for
Shakir,
them.
Hardy,
Yeah.
Sherfield, but
Cooper Cup, maybe. But again, outside of Cooper Cup, what do
what do
you
they
have?
have?
Michael Pittman Jr., Alex Pierce, I like him a lot. Josh Downs, liked him a lot coming out this last year, rookie. But do they I could see them being the 23rd receiver group because who's throwing them the football this year, you know? So it's
Right.
like what, um, New Orleans is interesting because isn't Thomas coming back, right? Michael Thomas?
Theoretically, yeah.
Right. So I
If he's
mean,
back, then he's great. But we've been waiting on him for 4 years now.
yeah. Yeah, I'd say
Um,
that those are the ones that kind of jump out to me. Everyone else feels pretty good to me.
Detroit feels a little low.
Where is
Amon-Ra
Detroit?
St. Brown, Jamison Williams, Marvin Jones at 22. Now, of course, Jamison Williams is suspended
But
for part of
also
the
Amon
year.
Ross St. Brown is, he's a slot. I'm always
Yeah.
like, if you don't have that true one skill set on your roster, I'm always like, how do you quantify that? It's the same thing with Cooper Cup, like really good receiver, but you can't you can't win inside and outside. I'm always a little bit like, how do you value that?
Yeah.
And that's just my thought on that.
Yeah. I will say the one thing I definitely agree with is Tennessee last. They got that
Yeah.
one, nailed that one. Houston actually gives them a little bit of a run for their money. Nico Collins, Robert Woods, but Traylon Burks, Nick Westbrook, Akine, Kyle Phillips, Chris Moore. Sorry, all due respect, Tennessee. Nailed it for you.
Yeah, how about
I
the
do
New
think
York
that's
Giants?
interesting, though. Yeah, I mean, the
Yeah,
Giants, yeah, the
29.
29th. But I do think it's interesting, right? Like the lines at receiver, like there's so much depth at that position in the league. And I guess that was
Yeah,
always my thing with when I would compare like Washington and Cincinnati. If all of a sudden Terry, Jahan, and Curtis went and played with Joe Burrow, would
yeah,
there really be a giant drop off in production? Like
yeah, it's
probably
tough.
some because Jamar Chase is super special and Terry's just very special.
Yeah,
But I really think that there wouldn't be that much drop off. And I think when you look at the quarterback situations, that is where there's a huge delineation in the league versus receiver is very situational dependent. A lot of the other positions are very, situational schematic dependent and the talent depth is there. And, maybe, yeah, I didn't realize how deep the position was and felt a little biased towards Terry, who feels like he gets slighted at every turn.
right,
Saw Jahan's touchdown production last year. Think that Curtis can be a lot more and was just horribly mismanaged schematically. But it is interesting to look at this list and kind of see where the lines are of tier
yeah,
one going all the way down to almost half the league versus
right,
quarterback where you could draw a line at 3 or 4.
right. Which I think it's interesting. It just
Yeah.
shows you like the different those top groups. There's not that much difference. Like if I was gonna bump Washington, I'd probably demote Arizona, probably demote Dallas a little bit because
Hmm.
I think that group like it's got pieces, but I don't think they're as good like in terms of well-rounded receivers as what Washington has. And then
Right.
the other one is interesting to me is the Vikings, Minnesota. Obviously they have Justin Jefferson, but same thing. They have Addison coming in, rookie,
Right.
like what and
Osborne
again,
showed flashes.
that offense is super helpful to that number 2 receiver, and I think he's gonna make a ton of plays there, but also it's like you've got guys who've shown a little bit more already, It's a little different to me than Seattle, because Seattle has their two studs returning, and you've got your kind of slot guy coming in. And just to give some context on that, I went and looked up all their PFF grades. Like a
Mhm.
good slot, a good third guy, if they're grading in the high 60s on PFF in terms of like WAR and just game value,
Yeah.
that's a really good three. And I will say Curtis is in the 70s. So obviously, like in terms of depth across, very good, but like just kind of an interesting little note there. So
Yeah. And
like
then
the
you
third
wonder, like,
guy, yeah,
Diami coming back this year with Sam, his college quarterback. They showed
yeah,
a little bit of magic last year. We'll see what they can do, getting on the field potentially more in a huge year for Diami Brown. All right, next week we'll probably look at the UDFA's, a rookie
yeah.
mini camp in the
Have
books
more time.
this weekend. Logan's watching the tape on all those guys, so we'll do that again. The schedule release show brought to you by Old Ox Brewery at Old Ox Brewery in Ashburn. If you want to hang out with Logan and Linnell on Thursday night. Until then, I'll see y'all on the radio, The Hoffman Show, 4 to 7 daily on the Team 980, and we'll see you next week on Take Command. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command. First, why don't you like it? It lets other people know that it was good, and then they should watch it too. And Logan, we have a new exclusive home for full episodes.
We do. 1067 The Fans YouTube page. Go check it out and please subscribe.
Yeah, do what Logan said. It was
Do it.
very, very smart.